Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast. I'm Joe and I'm your host today. Today we're wrapping up a powerful two-part message from Pastor Rob on Jesus' words from the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." If you caught yesterday's episode, you know this has been a deep dive into what forgiveness really looks like for followers of Jesus, both receiving God's forgiveness and extending it to others, even when it's hard and it hurts. In this conclusion, Pastor Rob shares how choosing to forgive can actually set you free from bitterness and bondage, and he gives a simple, practical way to start that process today. All right, let's jump into today's message with Pastor Rob.
Jesus was not praying for people who were ignorant of their actions. When he says they don't know what they're doing, he wasn't praying for people who didn't have any idea what they were doing. They all knew what they were doing. Each of these people, each of these groups knew what they were doing was wrong. And at the very least, if we want to give as much grace as we can, they could have known what was going on. They should have known what was going on. And they would have known what was going on had they listened to Jesus and the claims that he made about who he was, and had they read any part of the Old Testament that was available to them. Jesus wasn't praying for ignorant people. He was praying for people who knew what they were doing. Jesus was praying for people who did not perceive the far-reaching implications of their actions, of the consequences of their sin, but at the same time, they had no idea that the crucifixion that they were witnessing today was different from all the other crucifixions that they had seen in their lifetime. They had no idea that the death of this man would be intertwined with their life and the life of every human being who would ever walk on the face of this planet. They had no idea that the death of this man would bring life to those who believed in him and who trusted in what he did and put their faith and their hope in him. And if they truly didn't know what they were doing, and they really were ignorant, apparently ignorance does not absolve a person from the need to be forgiven, because Jesus said if they didn't know what they're doing, still forgive them. They really didn't know what they were doing. It seems from Jesus' request that ignorance does not absolve us from our need to be forgiven. So why did Jesus pray this prayer out loud? I think it was for the benefit of the guilty, for you and for me. And I think it was as an example of how we should live. When Jesus offered forgiveness to those who were executing him and who were a part of that whole process that day, and everyone who'd made fun of him, everyone who pointed a finger at him, everyone who made a joke about him, Jesus was simply living out the stuff that he had been preaching to them. In the same gospel, the Gospel of Luke, just a few chapters earlier, Jesus is standing before a crowd of people and he's teaching. And Jesus says these words. He says, "But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you." And Jesus is simply, as he's hanging on the cross, doing exactly what he had told all of his followers that they should do. He was practicing what he was preaching. He was saying it verbally, and then he was giving them this visual example of, this is the way I want people who are my followers, who are part of my kingdom, to live their life. On top of all of that, Jesus knew what he was doing. There was not a haphazard second in his life. He was simply fulfilling prophecy as well. Isaiah 53:12 says this, "For he bore the sin of many, and he made intercession for the transgressors. And so as Jesus is hanging on the cross between two thieves, praying for them and praying for you and me, he literally fulfilled prophecy. As we wrap up our time together and I think about what Jesus said on the cross and why he said it, I think there are two things that come to my mind this morning. Wrapped up in this phrase, experiencing God's forgiveness is our privilege. Because of what Jesus did on the cross, we have the incredible opportunity to ask Jesus to forgive us for the things that we've done wrong, and know that the price has already been paid by what he did on the cross. And if I trust what he did, and I put my faith and my hope and my love in him, then I could experience this abundant life that he talked about here on this earth, and eternal life with him forever. And so the question this morning is have you received God's forgiveness in your life? Because it's simply a prayer away, because the price has already been paid. In your notes, there's even a place right there, right in your notes, right where we are now, that you could pray a prayer that says, this is what I need to say in order to ask God for forgiveness and confess my sins and surrender my heart to him and get my name written down in this book of life that I can live forever. But I have to be honest with you. I know that's what it was about, but I feel like the reason that Jesus prayed this prayer out loud was for another reason. It was for every person who may have ever been hurt in this life. Every person who's ever had anybody wrong them or mistreat them or do anything wrong to them, Jesus was giving us an example of how to live. So while experiencing God's forgiveness is our privilege, extending God's forgiveness is our responsibility. If you're a human being, if you're a follower of God, even if you're not a follower of God, to hold on to the hurt and the pain that someone has caused you in your life and you choose not to extend forgiveness to them is the opposite of what God's calling you and asking you to do, and it will hurt you in the long run. Let's be honest, right? If anyone is in this room or watching online that's ever had anything done wrong to them, you don't have to think about it, right? If I were to say to you, is there anyone in your life that you've chosen not to forgive? Is there someone that you need to extend forgiveness to that for whatever reason, because of the hurt or the pain or whatever is associated with it, you've chosen not to extend that forgiveness? Chances are, if you have something like that in your life, you don't have to think hard about it. You know that it's there. You live with it all the time. And chances are, maybe even you know that you should forgive that person. You know that you should extend forgiveness because that's the way that we live. And you've heard that preached maybe 100 times before. But maybe you're saying, I'm going to do it, but not today. Maybe you're saying, I'll do it someday. I just need to understand what happened. I just need to get myself healthy. I just need to process all of this. I just need to get over it. And can I remind you, the example that Jesus set for us is that Jesus offered forgiveness while he was still on the cross. And while the pain and the hurt was still fresh, and while the blood from his wounds was still flowing down his body and pooling at the foot of the cross, Jesus did not wait until he could figure it all out and process it and understand it. He did it right then and there as they were putting the nails in his hands, as they were putting the nails in his feet, and as they were jamming the crown of thorns on his head. He said, forgive them. And if there was ever anybody who could have the right to demand retaliation or justice, it was Jesus. I mean, and he has the privilege that we don't have. Jesus never did anything wrong. The Bible says he lived his life and he never sinned. He never had a wrong thought. He never said something that was cruel or mean. He may have said things that made people think, but Jesus never offended God. He never did anything that God did not want him to do. He never did any of those things. So if anybody had the right for retaliation or revenge, it would have been Jesus, because he literally never did anything. And you and I cannot have that right, because we're all guilty sinners, as guilty as the two men that were hanging on the sides of Jesus and both sides of on a cross. But Jesus did not demand retaliation. He did not demand punishment. He recognized that forgiveness always costs somebody something, and he was the one paying the price. And the truth is, this morning, then just a minute, we're going to wrap this up. We're going to sing a song, give the offering, and we're going to walk out the doors. And the truth is that you are going to walk out the same way that you came in, or you can walk out different. The choice is literally up to you. The choice that you have is to pay the price, because the price has to be paid, and live in freedom by offering forgiveness, or to pay the price and to live in bondage by not offering forgiveness. It's totally your choice, and you'll make one of those two choices before you leave today. But I want to say to you this morning that if you forgive whoever it is for whatever they did to you, you're going to pay the price. You're already paying the price. You've already paid the price. You can't turn the clock back and undo it, but you can live in freedom. By offering forgiveness, you're no longer tied to that event. You're no longer tied to that experience. You're no longer tied to that person. You're set free of all that. Corrie Ten Boom, who was a prisoner in a Nazi war camp, saw her family mistreated by a Nazi war prisoner, by guards, and saw most of her family died. She lived through the horror of all of that. And at the end of it, one day she was preaching a message on forgiveness, and one of the soldiers that was a guard in the prison camp who had mistreated her family came forward and asked for forgiveness. And she said, I don't know how I did it, but I did it. And she says, after this, this came to my mind: to forgive is to set a prisoner free, and to realize all along that the prisoner was me. So when you choose not to forgive someone, you're not hurting that other person. You're the one who's staying tied to the hurt and to the pain and to the anger and to the frustration and to the bitterness. And you may say, well, that person needs to pay the price. They need to know what they did. They should experience some negative consequences as well. And here's the thing: what Jesus did is he said, Father, forgive them, and he left it up to God to deal out with the justice. And we should do the very same thing. In fact, Paul says in Romans chapter 12, he says, don't insist on getting even. That's not for you to do. I'll do the judging, says God. I will take care of it. So to forgive is to say, God, I'm releasing that person from the pain and the hurt that they've caused me. I'm done with it, and let God deal with it, because God is a much better judge than you are. And we're not in a good place to be a judge anyway, because we're pretty guilty ourselves. In your notes, it says this: if you do not forgive, you will pay the price and you will live in bondage and bitterness. And finally, why should you do this? I think you should do this because Jesus expects us to follow his example. I'm almost as sure as I can be that the reason Jesus prayed that prayer out loud on the cross is because he was setting an example for you and I to follow. This is what Jesus said. He says, but I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. And pray for those who mistreat you. And like 15 chapters later, Jesus is hanging on the cross and he's saying, Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. And he included you and he included me in that prayer. Last thing is this morning before we wrap up our time together, and it's this. I just want to say, you're never going to feel like forgiving someone. Maybe you're saying, well, I'm just going to wait till I feel better about it, till I understand it, till I process it, till I talk to somebody, till I get it all right. You'll never feel like forgiving. Forgiveness is not a feeling. Most things connected to our faith are not a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice that you make. And you say, I'm going to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't like doing it. There's nothing in me that wants to do it, but I'm doing it because I know it's the right thing to do. My friends, I want to tell you that when you do that, you experience the freedom that Jesus experienced. You experience the freedom that Jesus died for you and I to experience, that releases us from the bondage of that hurt and that pain and lets us go free. So Jesus says, as he's hanging on the cross, the first thing Jesus says as he's hanging on the cross is he lifts his face to heaven and he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. My prayer is that for whoever has wronged you, maybe you're in this room, maybe no one's in this room, I don't know, but if you're in this room and someone has done something to you, that you'll have the courage to forgive them this morning. If you're watching online, that you'll have the courage to offer that same forgiveness. In your notes, there's a prayer that you can pray. You don't even have to think about this very much. There's a prayer that says, you pray this prayer, I forgive blank, and you insert their name. For what they did to me, and you put what they did to you. I choose to release them from the debt that they owe me. And I ask you to bless them, God. And in that act, when you do that, what Jesus did on the cross, when you do the same thing, you find some freedom that you never even knew existed. And I'm telling you that bitterness and unforgiveness and resentment is one of the biggest traps that the enemy has for God's people. Don't fall into that trap. Jesus died for your freedom, not so that you could live in bondage.
Thank you so much for listening today. I hope God has used this episode to speak to your heart, maybe to invite you to receive his forgiveness, or maybe to take that hard but freeing step of forgiving someone who's hurt you. Remember, forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a choice that leads to the freedom Jesus died to give you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes, and share this with someone who might need encouragement today. Thank you for joining us on the Shepnaz Podcast. For Pastor Rob, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.